Imagine receiving a letter telling your village that an attack is coming. Not tomorrow, not next week, but someday soon, and then nothing happens. For 5 months, life goes on, people forget. Children play in the dusty streets. Farmers go to their fields. The markets open every morning. But one evening around 5 p.m., the sound of prayer echoed through the village of Woro in Kwara State. A familiar sound. A peaceful sound, but that evening it was not a call to worship, it was a trap. When the gunfire finally stopped, the quiet farming community was no longer the same. Homes burned, families destroyed, and survivors left asking one haunting question. How did a warning letter turn into one of the most devastating attacks the region had ever seen? Months before the attack, something strange happened in Woro. A letter arrived. According to community leaders, the message was chilling. Militants believed to be connected to Boko Haram warned the village that they would soon arrive. The message demanded that residents prepare themselves and submit to their extremist ideology. To many villagers, the letter sounded like a bluff. Woro was not known for insurgent activity. It was a quiet farming settlement in Kwara State, far from the areas where the insurgency had historically been strongest. For years, most attacks associated with Boko Haram had been concentrated in northeastern Nigeria, particularly in places like Borno State, near the vast region surrounding Lake Chad. So when the letter arrived in Woro, many residents believed it was nothing more than a threat meant to scare them. Weeks passed, then months, nothing happened. The warning slowly faded from memory. Life continued as it always had. Farmers woke before sunrise to tend their yams and maize. Children walked dusty paths to school. Women gathered at the village market to sell vegetables and grains. Even the elders who first worried about the letter eventually relaxed. 5 months had passed. Surely, if anything was going to happen, it would have happened already. Or so they thought. By February 2026, the warning letter was almost forgotten. The village felt safe again. People joked about the threat. Some believed it had been written by criminals trying to extort money. Others assumed it was simply misinformation. But beneath the calm surface, danger was quietly moving closer. Militant groups had been expanding their reach across northern and central Nigeria. Security experts had warned that extremist groups were pushing beyond their traditional strongholds. But in small villages like Woro, these national security warnings felt distant. Too distant to be real. On the day everything changed, nothing seemed unusual. It was an ordinary afternoon. Farmers were returning from their fields. Children were playing outside their homes. Women prepared evening meals. The sun slowly dipped toward the horizon. Then, at around 5 p.m., a sound echoed across the village. The call to prayer. For many Muslim residents, it was the signal to gather, a moment of peace. A time to pause the day and connect with faith. But this time, the call carried a darker purpose. Survivors would later say that militants had used the familiar sound to draw people out of their homes. And when residents stepped outside, they walked directly into danger. Moments after the call to prayer echoed through Woro, the sound of motorcycles began to grow louder. At first, some residents thought it was travelers passing through, but the noise kept increasing. Then suddenly, hundreds of armed men rode into the village. They arrived on motorcycles wearing military-style clothing. Many carried rifles, others carried fuel containers. Within seconds, gunfire erupted. Panic spread across the community. People ran in every direction. Some tried to hide inside their homes. Others fled into nearby bushes. But the attackers moved quickly. They fired indiscriminately, targeting anyone in sight. Witnesses said the militants moved from house to house, forcing residents out and setting buildings on fire. Flames began to spread through the village. Smoke filled the sky. And the chaos grew worse. Some women and children were abducted and forced onto motorcycles. Others were separated from their families in the confusion. In another horrifying moment, Christian residents who had gathered inside a church seeking safety were reportedly locked inside as the building was set on fire. The attack continued for hours. The sound of gunfire echoed across the region long after darkness fell. By the time the attackers finally disappeared into the night, The once peaceful village had been devastated, but the horror of that evening was only the beginning. Because what came next would leave scars that could last for generations. When morning arrived, survivors slowly emerged from hiding. Some had spent the entire night in nearby bushes. Others had taken refuge in neighboring villages. As the sun rose over Woro, the scale of the destruction became clear. Homes had been burned to the ground. Entire compounds were reduced to ashes. Motorcycles and abandoned belongings lay scattered across the village roads, and everywhere there was silence, the kind of silence that follows unimaginable tragedy. Families began searching for missing relatives. Parents looked for children. Children looked for parents. Some names were called again and again, but no answer came. Community leaders gathered survivors to begin counting the dead. The number kept rising, dozens, then more. Each number represented a life lost. A farmer, a teacher, a mother, a child. For many survivors, the emotional shock was overwhelming. Some struggled to understand how a normal day had transformed into a nightmare in just a few hours. Others kept replaying the events in their minds. The warning letter, the months of silence, the call to prayer, the motorcycles, the gunfire. It all felt unreal. Many survivors said the hardest part was the sense that the attack had been predicted. The letter had warned them. But after 5 months of peace, few believed the threat would ever become reality. Now the village faced the painful task of rebuilding. But rebuilding after such violence is never simple. Many homes were gone. Families had lost everything they owned. Some residents were too afraid to remain in the area. Others refused to leave, determined to protect their land and honor the memory of those who died. Aid groups and local authorities eventually arrived to assist survivors. Emergency shelters were set up for displaced families. Food and medical supplies were distributed, but even with support, recovery would take years. For children who witnessed the violence, the trauma could last a lifetime. For parents who lost loved ones, the grief might never fade. And for the village itself, the identity of Woro had forever changed. What was once a quiet farming community was now remembered as the site of a devastating attack. Today, many residents continue to ask the same question: could this tragedy have been prevented? Some believe stronger security presence in rural areas might have stopped the militants before they reached the village. Others argue that better communication between communities and authorities might have helped residents prepare for the threat. But for the survivors of Woro, these questions come too late, because nothing can undo the events of that evening. Nothing can bring back the lives that were lost. Yet despite the devastation, many residents say they refuse to let fear define their future. They continue rebuilding homes, replanting crops, reopening schools. Because for them, survival is more than just living through tragedy. It is about reclaiming hope, and it proves that even after the darkest night, a community can rise again. Thanks for watching. Please remember to hit the subscribe button.